Hey, we're live.
Hello.
As I drop my iPad. All right. I haven't really even. I just advertised this on Instagram, so
Okay.
it's kind of real time. We're kind of doing everything real time right now. We're
That's
live
okay.
about going live. We're advertising it live. Also. Yeah. So lots of interesting, wacky, weird, wild things going on in the world. Of big note today has been Lil Nas X's Satanic debut, which is interesting, very interesting. Says a lot about where money is being invested, I would say. Like, if you look at one thing, but well, let me be a little more clear about what happened for those of you who might not have tuned into it. Hard to miss right now, but basically, this rapper Lil Nas X, who promotes himself as being a children-friendly rap artist, so he says that's his main market, and he recently comes out with a music video where he's descending a stripper pole into hell to then be molested in different ways by Satan himself. And then simultaneously, I guess as part of a campaign, he's also selling satanic shoes that have the pentagram and all the symbology, and each pair of shoes actually has human blood. Human blood. Of course, they don't specify where they got the blood from or what happened to the blood before it got into the shoes, but there's human blood in each pair of shoes. And there's lots to say about that. But that's sort of the overview. So this is like it's a big thing right now because obviously all the crazy 17th letter of the alphabet people have been going on about a satanic push from a high level. And it is a very validating event for that group of people, I would say, only because it proves that big money, like big studios, like people in very high positions investing a lot of money into music videos, into, shoe lines and all the promotion that goes with them, that big money is going into something that is carefully crafted to be highly satanic. So at the very least, it's proof of an elite desire to increase Satanism in some way or another, I would say.
Right, and so systemically, what's the concern? That people will be immoral?
Well, that youth are impressionable to this, right? He's saying he's for the youth. This rapper is saying, I am a rapper for the youth. And so you and I were talking about this earlier, that when we're growing up, we're very attracted to counterculture, right? Naturally, in the process of identity formation, young people see what is the mainstream culture, what is the culture my parents are adhering to, and do I need to counter that culture to form my own identity, right? I think that's like a very basic insight into like the psychology of a developing sort of teenager, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the concern, I think, is that when children are at that developmental stage and when counterculture becomes appealing, what they encounter is a highly funded push towards Satanism and the values of Satanism. I think a particular, very orthodox version of Satanism. Not just Satanism that is... there are versions of Satanism that are more benign, that are less into like the sacrificial aspect of it, and some of like the darker, more occult rituals about controlling others. There are versions of Satanism that are more mainstream, that are more focused on that and being like super pro-science and super pro-materialism. But there is a highly charged like orthodox Satanism. That's the concern, being pushed, and that it's much more than that benign version.
Mm-hmm. So what's the difference between this and the previous satanic panics that we've seen recurring over the years? And what evidence do we have now as adults that embedding of Satanism in our pop culture affected us as well? Like, because we grew up with some form, and then previous generations, like our parents, also grew up with it as well. And I don't see anything. It might be subversive.
Well, it has to be subversive. So when we're talking about social engineering, like from these particular groups, right? So we're talking about like groups of people that have stated intentions to manipulate the world in certain ways, to engineer the population to behave towards a certain end, right? When we're looking at these groups, like bloodline families that have maintained power over certain things, when we're looking at that, their view is multi-generational. Their view is subversive over many generations. So you could say that, yes, this has been prevalent. Of course it has, because there would be a multi-generational,
So then I guess I would ask, when did it begin? And is this something that just has existed for some time now? Is it really getting worse?
Well, yes, I would say that it is. So when we look, for example, at the idea of inversion, of sexual inversion, right? There's a lot of satanic symbolism around this idea of sexual inversion, of inverting one's own sexuality, of going against the natural sexual way, right? This is an old idea. Now it gets very dicey because then some people feel like, there's an equating of the transgender lifestyle with Satanism, and it gets very, very tricky to talk about. But culturally speaking, this does exist. And so when you look at, okay, you have a rapper who is being promoted as highly transgender, who has promoted a sort of gender dysphoria, like a gender fluid identity, who has, been a symbol for that. And you have that being pushed as not something that's just uplifting a minority group, but as more like a cultural norm of like, it is normal to have a totally ambiguous personal gender, right? Because you have big figures with big money behind them being used as messaging systems in this way, right? So then you look at that, and then you see in the schools, there's this spike in gender dysphoria with children. You have a father now fighting to protect his child from having their gender permanently altered through surgery and drugs. So I see a very clear connection. I see actual real world results.
Sure, but I wonder if the connection there with the dysphoria is more in the schools than it is.
It is in the schools.
So what I'm saying is that my feeling is that it's a lot more the therapists and the personal care that is given in the schools that help these children do that. And yes, sure, they see things reflected in the media, but I really don't know if that's the big push. Like, that's all part of it. Yeah. But I really do feel like more than anything, to push these kids over, they require adults close to them helping them.
Oh, yes, absolutely. But to make that a culturally acceptable thing to do, you had to infiltrate the universities with all the gender theory. You had to make all these systems of meaning first, which then creates professionals in these fields who are willing to follow that path because they've been taught that they're part of us, like a movement of justice and equality. But that took a long time to build. And when you have cultural icons like this, it's tied into a large systemic push from many angles. So it's not to say that it was entirely cultural, that was shifted, but it's part of a larger normalization of these things, especially under the banner of being progressive, of creating equality and opportunity. It's under those banners. And so then you get, professionals who believe they're doing their moral duty because they're coming from this warped culture. So to me, I see a very clear overlap there,
Sure. I just wonder sometimes about the Satanic Panic and how orchestrated it is. And there are people so concerned about Satanism on the rise, and I'm not disagreeing with that. But I feel like the panic is also engineered. So those of us on the other side seeing Satanism rise or feeling it around us or whatever it is, the panic attached to that, and you know what I mean? That's also engineered. We're also part of it.
Well, I think there's a feeling of powerlessness for a lot of people because they're like, I can't compete with that messaging system. It's like we've said, it means it's getting into the home. It means it's getting past parents into children's value systems, right? So there's probably a lot of people who do feel helpless, who are flailing when they see this in the most powerful media messaging system in the world. And this is what's being uplifted when we know that culture creates children's value systems more than the parents.
Yeah, and I would also say that growing
there's probably
up,
powerlessness.
I would also say that, beyond the Satanism that I see being pushed in the media, I also see objectification of women as a very obvious one that we haven't stopped yet. For example, going to the protest and walking down the street and walking on Yonge Street in Toronto, and they have pole dancing advertisements with pretty much naked women on it that Asher is now
Yes.
exposed to.
Yes.
So
Very disturbing.
that's no different to me
Yes.
than the Satanism. Like, I really don't. And what I think, like, I guess, as someone who is aware enough to be upset by those things, we have to imbue in our children as much as possible
The Satanism
critical
is
thinking
worse.
skills.
Yeah, but the Satanism is worse because the end goal of the Satanism is pedophilia, is grooming children to be abused.
That's the same with the women one. It's grooming young girls.
Yeah, I don't know if it targets children in the same way.
It's young women.
They're not children. The images downtown were not children.
No, but they're young women.
It's problematic
They're
in the
made
same
to
way.
look young.
It's problematic in the same way.
Yes.
Well, and that gets into the culture of sexuality and pornography
I would say
and the
it's no
focus on
different.
youth. Well, but you have this is the thing, is there is some truth to that in terms of the porn industry being exposed right now, and the porn industry being
Yeah.
that it runs on that for sure.
Yeah.
But I would say that the hypersexualization and the Satanism, like, they have some great deal of overlap for sure. But I think the explicit Satanism is markedly different in certain ways.
Of
I wouldn't
course
say
it's
the same
different. I'm
thing.
just saying they're very parallel. They run
Yeah.
parallel to
Yeah.
me. And when
Yeah.
I see the Satanism, it's upsetting. When I see the objectified women and
You
my
know-
5-year-old son has to see it,
It's interesting, yeah.
implanted. But all I can do, this is all around us. It's energetic as well. Like,
Yeah.
Of course it ingrains an image, and that's very traumatizing. I can say that for myself as a kid, I saw things that I shouldn't have seen at a very young age.
Yeah.
And those images are ingrained. It's like very difficult, right?
Yeah.
To see those things as a kid. But critical thinking, teaching our kids the best we can, like, they're going to come into a lot of situations where they're gonna have to rely on that.
Yes.
Regardless of when they're born and what generation they're born into. Like, I think it, as best as you can, like, you cannot control, but
Yeah.
if they're met with those confusing views and those very shocking images, there's not going to be a lot we can do for them seeing it, but the critical thinking skills that come into play afterwards
Yeah.
can be like the most epic tool for them to navigate the things that they see and witness in this horrible world. Like,
Well,
it's-
protecting, I think, again, it's
You know.
a similar issue because protecting free thought in children, I guess the challenge is the level of media saturation that you're
Yes.
competing with. The sheer saturation that you're trying to, while your children, a similar thing, after we passed by the stripper club, and Asher is seeing this huge animated or whatever it was, like, image of a woman, it's hypersexual, not appropriate for public space at all, I would say. But then afterwards, when we were down at the end of the protest, there was, like, I don't know, a music video, an ad or something, and it was just like, women in spandex, like, just booty shaking into the camera, close up. And again, like, this is public space. This creates value systems in children. And so, it's similar. So people who are concerned about the satanic push, it's funny because a lot of that gets ignored because of the fact that, there's the notion that only conspiracy theorists are really worried about actual Satanism in any positions of power, But then at the same time, you have people who are allowed to talk about the hypersexualization. You're much more allowed to be critical of, overt sexualization in culture than you are about Satanism, because the Satanism thing, it's like, well, you're not allowing a religion to have free reign. This is supposed to be a free culture with free speech, freedom of religion. And so a lot of that, like, that gets used to make it seem inappropriate to even be critical of this. I'm sure there will be articles written in support of this big satanic campaign. We know it's coming. We know they're being written right now. There's going to be a mainstream, push of like, oh, the huge panic about it. But is there anything to panic? No, really, no. And then they'll, I know what they're going to do. It's very obvious because there's so much money behind this, right? So they want to sculpt the messaging around it. But also,
yeah, it's interesting.
It's like you're saying, there is also like the push to cause panic, to cause that feeling of disempowerment. And the best, hi, Kitty. The best we can do, and we often say this, is really to fight to become producers of culture, to support the decentralization of cultural production, support smaller like media outlets that are growing, becoming independent. Like Rebel News is a really good example of that.
Yeah.
Of, if we're going to take back culture, then, we need grassroots efforts.
Yeah, it's pretty messed up.
But what's going to shift, is where the money goes. Because there's enough people waking up that can move money at these larger scales to create larger expressions of culture. And, that can offer counterculture and things that are appealing for young people who are seeking counterculture.
Yeah.
That empowers them, that supports free thought. Because really the ultimate counterculture to give developing minds is free thought.
Yeah.
Because if you empower a young mind with the capacity for free thought, then it's what you're talking about. Then they have that tool to go in, and whatever is being impressed upon them, they can observe it.
Yeah.
And they can observe what it's attempting to do within them, and they can feel it.
As much as possible. Like, the reality is, too, we are all conditioned. So, wherever you are, you have to figure out whatever your conditioning is.
Yeah.
And so, some people would be more conditioned, in their diet. Some people will be more conditioned in their emotions or, their emotional response. Like, there's just so many ways, or in lots of ways. And so, some things that I see even in the kids now, it's like, oh, well, some, like, Asher might not be easily conditionable in some ways, but in others, very.
Yes, absolutely. You see where they sort of have the openness.
Yeah, so all of us, right? Like, we might be able to see Satanism and not have that sort of take that in, but what are we taking in?
Mm-hmm.
We are a part of society. We are not, most of us
a good
want
example
to be a part. So you have to let something in, right? What are you taking in?
A great example of this would be, let's say someone today is raised by really strict Christian parents who are overly controlling, right? Right? And so that young person is developing under the pressure of like a very strict, intense, maybe overly controlling Christian environment. And then they see this. And they see this young rapper coming up, and he's got like all this success. He's eloquent. He's able, whatever they see, that's so appealing for that young mind, because they want to form an identity that's not being controlled by their family environment, right? And so this is also the dangers. Like that would show that's a good example of a kid.
Experience, even, I would say.
Right.
Like
right.
being raised Catholic and being forced to do rituals that I didn't want to do.
Right.
That I verbally asked not to do and was forced into doing them.
I
studied Satanism. I deeply wanted to take part of it in because it was the opposite of what I was being forced to do. And inherently, it was not. Like, I realized very quickly, like, most of the messages were not natural to me.
Yeah.
But I did go into that realm of counterculture.
Yes.
Simply because I wasn't given control in that realm. It makes sense. It makes total sense.
I have to wonder I wonder how loud the children actually are. I don't know if anyone listening, if our children are extremely loud. We've never done this during the day while they're here, awake like this. So
sounds like they're moving furniture.
I don't know what's happening. I hope it's audible for the audience here. I lost my train of thought.
Yeah, I was just saying that it's true what you're saying about, the counterculture arising because there is, maybe for some kids so much oppression occurring already.
Yeah.
In a religious way or in
so it appears as a path of freedom.
Or it's just something that is seen as the opposite.
Yes.
As well.
Yes.
So it is freedom,
absolutely.
But it is also something like you don't fully understand. And so you've been told not to go into that realm. But definitely there was a sense of freedom in it because it was mostly about that. It was mostly about yourself and materialism and looking at yourself as like a god in a sense.
Yes.
And your needs and that's why I didn't really I was never about my own needs. It never even back then I was like
that doesn't fit for me.
Be very selfish person. I can't do that. But I had friends who really took it seriously, and watching people's behaviors change based upon these things, it was different. It was different, and you could see that it was providing that kind of like outlet that, again, your parents aren't going to provide. Your parents aren't giving you an option to explore that. They're telling you this is how it is, And for me, and I guess friends too, they were raised Catholic. I don't know if a public school and different things, would have that, but in the Catholic school, there were definite pushbacks and groups of people who delved into that realm.
Of course, as there would be. Absolutely, as there would be. Well, so like, how do we make it safe to, for children to have counterculture? It's like, this is a tricky thing because it's such a natural thing for identity formation for children to go against their parents.
I think the parents need to step up. I think the parents could help.
What, with counterculture?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, part of it is going against your parents, so there might not be any, much.
Yeah, like what kind of parent
there is room that a parent can provide for not making the counterculture scary.
Mm-hmm.
Because, if your parents are scared about what you're researching or looking into or sort of ideas that you're thinking, they're putting that fear in you, in a sense, right? Mm-hmm. And they're also rejecting you. They're rejecting possibly something interesting you might find, possibly having critical thinking, possibly discovering something at a very poignant time in your life where you're a teen. You're like, who am I? I'm, and maybe you're very fascinated by things. And then, parents are kind of like, no, don't do that because it's not what I know. And it seems bad and it looks very bad. Like, it looks scary to a parent to see someone talking about, death and drinking blood and, all the things you can think of. Like, of course it's scared. And even at the time, I was like, of course my parents are scared. But I can't even speak to them in a simple way. They don't believe me or listen or have a sense of receptivity to deal with the counterculture at all. So it was like their response made it more of an issue, I would say. And then, and I guess it's hard when you don't know what to do. You feel maybe at a loss. But I think what you can do is just listen and be more open and not try to put that fear onto a kid who's exploring.
Well, and less control, right? Like in the example of the being overly controlled from a more Christian perspective. Well, if we're less controlling with our children, then their response in that process of identity formation might be less extreme. It might be less extreme.
Control is just simply one,
children are so aggressively controlled. And so again, the idea that the satanic aspect having such appeal, while at the same time, child rearing and schooling systems are overly controlling. So you oppress children, and then you give them something where everyone's like, don't do this. And they're like, well, I'm for sure doing that.
It's like freedom.
Yes. It seems like freedom. And this is what's so subversive, and this is why it is dangerous. So, people forget about that element of how do we as a society create space for youth to play with counterculture, to experience, to produce, to consume counterculture, and to use that to develop the identity of a new generation, right? Because each generation needs to somewhat distinguish itself from the old, right? And so if we're less controlling with the younger generations, then when they're going through that process of hey, we're this as a generation, not what you were, then our ability to step back and stop interfering in their development will likely, I would say, create more harmony, in larger scales. But there's another element to this, right? Because yes, there's a whole cultural side of it, but there is an occult, spiritual side to wearing the blood of strangers on your feet every day, right? That's enforcing actual magical rituals upon people.
I know, it's not nothing.
So it's not just cultural. We also have the spiritual, metaphysical side of this. And there are real spiritual dangers to wearing someone's blood on your body all day, right? Blood is very powerful, and we were talking about this earlier. Blood itself is not a bad thing to be working with in some way. There are ways that people engage with blood that are their own practices, that are that are, you know, ancient
yeah.
and positive. You know, not all blood rituals are satanic or evil.
When a woman eats, like, consumes her own placenta, like, there's life in blood. There's some of the, I know that's an organ as well, but even, you know, when some women are menstruating, they do consume the blood as well as part of, like, you know, health and ritual, and there's, you know, practices there. So I think, yeah.
And the reason,
very powerful.
That's right. The reason humans have worked with blood in a ritualistic way for thousands of years is because our blood is very, very powerful. It is, you know, it's an incredible part of our biology. And you know, I've spoken about this in Worlds Within on Edge of Wonder, that our blood is a sensory organ. Our blood is spiraling through our bodies, like creating these little vortices, right? So your blood spirals through your whole body. It spirals through your heart. And in spiraling, it's creating these vortices, and it's highly connected to our light bodies, right? Our etheric bodies. So your blood is very sensitive to the vibrations around you, to the feelings of other people around you. Your blood is made up of, like, I think something like 20% of your body water is in your blood, and all the water in your body is vibrating according to the positions of the stars and planets. Like, it's really quite incredible. So when you think of, like, that being what's occurring in your biology in a day-to-day way, and that your blood is performing that role for you as you consciously move through this life, and then you think of what it means to take the blood of a deceased body and to put it on your feet, and then to wear that as you move through life, and as your feet are attempting to connect to the earth, in between your feet and the earth is another human being's blood. So this is not a simple thing. This is not a meaningless thing. You know, I think this needs to be understood. Those elements of it need to be understood. It can't just be perceived as cultural warfare. I'd say once you're putting blood in shoe lines, it's spiritual warfare. Very overt.
I know, but they've killed spirituality to a point where
that seems ridiculous.
You can't really say anything is spiritual.
I know.
It's not tangible to anyone.
Everyone's such a materialist now, which again goes back to the same campaigns.
Yes.
That they overtly said Satanism. We want to make people, Satanism is materialistic and obsessed
in
with
and of
just
itself, it's Satanism.
Yeah, so it's so crazy because it's like our culture has been indoctrinated by Satanism by being so materialistic, right? By worshiping the material. That's right. And so again, that makes it harder for people to see what's really going on here, right? Because they were already, it's sort of like not seeing the forest for the trees, or how the fish doesn't know it's in water. You know, there was already a saturation of the satanic value system. So that when these overt messaging systems that have real satanic elements pop up, they don't seem absurd because they're actually embedded in value systems that have been popularized over time in other more subversive ways.
Yes, the saturation. And we've seen that in TV shows lately. We're like, wow, this is what teenagers are watching, and it's just really heavily...
the occult satanic aspect is being pushed. You go through Netflix and there's so much content that is overtly Luciferian, like overtly about, you know, a show about Lucifer, you know, or like Sabrina the Teenage Witch, right? Where it's like, this is about like basically a satanic family just like fitting in, and like a teenager growing up and doing her rituals, like, you know.
And I think people are also conflating Satanism with witchcraft and Wiccan, and all three things are people are just
because they talk about this.
Up. It's just now it's a cult.
It's like a hodgepodge
as its own sort of thing that they've generated. They're like, we've generated what we want you to believe the occult is.
But again, this is laid out. This is mapped out in the Toronto Protocol. Specifically, they say under the idea that all religions and cultures should be accepted, we will infiltrate. Under this notion of total acceptance of all religions, So that's part of it, right? So it's like, don't be against, like, you know, if you're against this, then you're against Wiccans too. Then that's why they make it kind of murky, right? Because then it can be like, oh, okay, so you're against all of those things.
Yeah.
Instead of like, no, I'm against overt, like, orthodox satanic living. Personally, not down with that. Also, I don't want to
Not
work
herbs and, you know, other kind of magic that is, you know, not killing people. You know, or wearing strangers' blood. Do they know if it's a deceased person's blood?
People are now finally asking this. Where did the blood come from to produce this shoe line? In a world where people are like, aren't people like trying to find blood donors still? Like, isn't that still like a struggle?
Issue, right?
There's like a constant struggle to find blood donors. So, okay. So, where is this blood coming from?
Yes,
but you know what?
True.
Could we even find out if we wanted to? Because truly, if there's something more insane, because I will go conspiratorial on it. I suspect that rituals have been performed on the blood. Yeah. Right? That actual rituals have been performed on the blood before it was put into the shoe line. That's what I suspect, right? But if that's the case, then probably that won't be something anyone can find out. They have a cover story already made, and so when people did, probably, but who knows? Maybe it'll just come out because it is 2021, so it could just come out that like, here are the kids they used, and then no one cares or something. I don't know, but
I know it's horrible, and that's the thing too. I guess that it's, you know, as far as like what you would say mainstream, because people, you know, think that, you know, large groups of people are wackos and conspiracy theorists for theorizing that there are large satanic cults operating and things like that. And then right at the same time, you're like, oh, but by the way, I'm just going to buy these sneakers with someone's blood. But you're crazy and you're a conspiracy theorist for even assuming. Why would you even say such shit? And you're like, okay. So, yeah, that's someone who's absorbed, I think, more, you know?
Think about it this way. Like, if this goes really, really far, let's say this goes super far. Imagine this culture war continuing and they normalize it for another 50 years. So then what happens? A politician comes out and says, you know what? I'm a Satanist.
Yeah.
And I have I have a right to be a Satanist. And and it's like, yeah, you know what I mean? Like, that's where we're going. So that the population, if we go further, the population will cheer that as like progressive. Yes, we live in a better world. Yes, a satanic politician, finally, they've been oppressed. Look at the way they've been oppressed. And like, oh my God, I can just see it. I can see it getting to that point because I know, well, I mean, I've read that is their vision. The point is that, so we stop it now. The point is that we stop it now, you know, where it's like, oh, I see where they're going. So no, hard nope on that.
Hard no. But at the same time, again, it makes that like sort of very clear now. You can say, look, is it really that crazy when now you have this product?
Yes.
You know, so it, in a way, it's not a
it might wake more people up.
But it allows you to create like a parallel and be like, look at what's going on. And like, at the very least, you cannot say that these people theorizing are unwell.
The core thing to me is, look, if culture forms value systems in children, then please look.
Yeah, you have to look.
That's it. You have to look. You call people conspiracy theorists, whatever, but it doesn't matter. You can't get around the fact that culture forms value systems in children against the will of parents, and this is being invested in as a major cultural messaging system. If you don't have any concerns about a child icon being molested by Satan and then promoting shoes with human blood in them, if you don't personally have concerns, then I would say you lack critical thinking.
Yeah, and maybe even a sense of intuition. And I know we've all been there.
But it's logical. It's not even just intuitive. Culture forms value systems in children. Who wants that as a value system for the children?
Like on a very visual level, like visual images are so physically penetrating.
Yeah.
So if you're very like tuned to your body and you see something like that, your intuition should tell you right away, like, what's going on. Like, I've ignored my intuition a lot, I'm not saying, but there have been times when visual images give me like a gut response. Lots.
Yes.
And so I don't think, like, I think if we're, again, tuning our intuition like we always are trying to do, those things can be observed as well. But I guess that's a thing. It's like if you're just kind of cut off and maybe you have a series of other values in place already as well, then it won't seem so obvious. It won't be.
Yes. How saturated are you by a value system that welcomes this?
Yeah, and so then it wouldn't even be because you're skewing your intuition. It's with your set of values in place. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's very interesting having all this happen while there's this dad fighting for his child's like whole gender freedom. I mean, the overlap of this is really, 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 I think, the overlap of these things is important to see, I think, because, when you see what values and what sort of bodily identity formation sort of systems are being promoted in someone like Lil Nas X, and then you see a parent fighting for their child, and that child is, they're being physically altered against the parent's will. This is a very, very obvious overlap of agendas. It's very, very obvious. I wouldn't say that's conspiratorial at all. There have been people trying to blow the whistle on this, trying to speak up about this for a long time. It's not really that new. And when you look back to the Nazi war camps and the experiments they were doing, they were taking women away, turning them into men, bringing them back to the prisons, taking the men away, turning them into women, bringing them back to the prisons. No one knew what the hell was going on. People were just coming back with their gender identity totally changed. So we know that there are groups, tied to Nazism and communism that were very interested in this, that because their ideology was how to break people down and control them. And so one way of breaking people down and controlling them is by messing with their ability to form identities. And gender is a part of that. And so it's just logical to understand that if there is an information war and that one of the things is about stopping the population from forming healthy identities, and that gender is one of the parts of, identity formation, of course there are people who have been messing with that. Of course, So,
Seems like counterculture is more Christian now.
It's so interesting. It's weird. I know.
Starting to
it's kind of flipped. Christian is sort of the new counterculture in a lot of ways.
Funny.
And it's very funny how that's flipped. And that's not our experience because we're not at all Christian, but I see this. There is, because I think, it's natural because, to a certain extent, Christianity has the value system to combat what's being pushed, especially since it's satanic. So it's Christians are oh great, let's go fight Satan. Woohoo! So it's their time. They're jumping into it. Satan's here. Let's get him.
I knew he'd come back.
He showed himself. Let's go, guys. But that's good. I think that's a good thing. I don't think it means that everyone needs to become Christian to battle this.
No.
But I am very happy to know about my Christian friends and the Christian population that's rising up and calling it out. Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's all I have to say about it. Anything else you want to add?
I don't think so.
What's in the diffuser today, Amanda? Anything to fight Satan? Any sense to fight Satan?
I guess I could have thought of that, but I didn't. I was just thinking more regeneration. I don't know, I'm in this place of needing, and maybe with the spring and all that, but I just feel like I'm in that place.
Full moon?
It's a full moon.
Full moon?
Yeah.
Full
so
moon
I just put in some cypress and some geranium and cilantro. I just feel like they're really emotionally cleansing, and some basil.
Very nice.
Focus. Yeah.
It's very uplifting.
Yeah. Regenerating for the mind, I think.
Yeah, I would say so.
It feels like it.
Yeah, I was feeling very clear and stimulated by it.
Yeah. Basil can keep you focused on something, keep you on path.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully our screaming children were not too disturbing for you guys. That's all we want to talk about today because it was really quite an interesting topic. And, we'd love to know people's thoughts on counterculture and identity formation and all these big things that we have to work out.
Experiences too, because we all have very unique experiences.
Yeah.
With it, so it's very interesting.
Yes, absolutely. And we're working on lots of new things. You can check out our shop at the link in the description. We've got a couple items there, and we're building our little library of products. But check out our Ormus and essential oil blends and lots of new things to come. Thanks for joining in for everyone who came. We'll see you next time. Bye.